Hello, my name's Ed Poole and I'm a Green Party member. We currently have elections to our national executive, including deputy leader position. So I'm interviewing candidates for deputy leader to find out who they are and why we should vote for them. Today I have Alex Mace. Hi, Alex.
Hi, Ed.
Just want to tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
Yeah, sure. So I am Alex Mace. I am a city councillor here in Worcester. I was first elected in 2024. I am now currently a co-leader of the Green Group. We are the second largest group on the city council, and I am running to be a deputy leader of the National Green Party.
Why did you join the Green Party and why should other people?
So I have been a member for 10 years now. I joined in 2015 after the chaos with Ed Miliband general election. Because I came out of that general election, I was really fed up with the choices that we were being given. And the particular thing I remember in that general election that was that the Conservatives were saying they were going to freeze child benefit, and Labour's big offer was that they were going to raise it by 1%. And I was like, is this really the best we can do where we're being forced to choose like with such a fag packet between the two? Yeah, that was why I joined. I didn't really get active locally until 2023, I think. We had a bit of local controversy over um, uh, the election of the leader for the city council. They ended up with a Tory getting involved, and I thought, well, I want to get more involved so that I can understand how these things are happening and what's going on. And yeah, the rest has kind of been history. I've been involved in doing campaigning for the city council elections in 2023. I stood as a paper candidate, and then last year as a target candidate in the ward where I live, and won. Replacing a very good previous Green councillor called Marjorie Bissett, who was our leader. She retired, yeah, and then this year became co-leader.
How do we balance the need for infrastructure projects with protecting the environment?
Um, so the test for me with infrastructure projects is, does it reduce our carbon output overall and the impact on the environment over the long term? Are there cheaper, faster solutions available now? So, for a couple of examples, high speed rail. So obviously we've got the very big project to build HS2 in this country. In France, they've banned flights where the same journey can be made by train in under 2.5 hours. Because flying can emit over 70 times the carbon for a train over the same journey. And there's no doubt that building high speed rail, especially in this country, is extremely expensive and comes with an enormous cost in carbon. But over the long term, there's a substantial reduction because we can move people around. Now, there are other issues with rail in this country, like the cost. It's we end up with train tickets that cost a lot more than flights, which is something we need to do something about. But by having low carbon ways to get people around, people who can move can do it in a low carbon way, and that generates jobs, it generates growth, and it's is investment that helps make sure that we can live within our limits. Whereas something like nuclear power, we spend billions and billions of pounds building nuclear energy in this country, and it will reduce our carbon output, and in theory should have limited impact on the environment. Although that comes with a non-zero risk that impact can be really, really bad. But there are other options for power generation that can solve the same problem better, faster, and cheaper, like solar and wind and batteries with better environmental outcomes. It's all about what is that balance. I think no one would say we can't build any infrastructure in this country, but we want to make sure that it's compatible with climate goals, and reducing carbon output. Whereas any suggestion of like expanding airports, like the current government wants to do, is to be called out as complete madness in this environment.
The UK Supreme Court has ruled that for the purposes of the Equality Act 2010, the definition of sex is biological sex, not gender identity. What's your position on that?
I mean, I think we always have to keep in mind when we're talking about this. Obviously, we're two white men discussing the Equality Act, and it's always better to listen to the voice of the people who are affected by the judgment, I think, than potentially what I'm saying. But having said that, the judges have ruled as they've ruled, that the Equality Act doesn't make sense if, for the purposes of the Act, sex is not interpreted as biological sex. Now, I'm not a judge. They know a lot more about interpreting laws and how they're written than I do, so I accept their judgment. I think what it makes clear is that that law was written in 2010, which doesn't seem like that long ago, but it was a very different time. We didn't have equal marriage, for example. And I understand that the Equality Act, as written, doesn't deal with intersex people at all. So people might be genetically XX or XY, and their genes are expressed such that they are physically different to what you'd expect from their chromosomes. So I think we need to update the Equality Act as an urgent matter to properly deal with the changes in how gender is dealt with in today's society. I think it is clear that we should say that a trans man is a man and a trans woman is a woman. That seems a perfectly reasonable thing to say in today's society. We are all damaged by strict gender roles. Saying that men or women have particular roles in society and what they should be doing. There is a vast. Everyone talks about sex being a very binary thing, but I think there's a vast range of people and bodies in either sex. I was really interested in listening to an episode of The Infinite Monkey Cage a few years ago. It was talking about the differences between men's brains and women's brains, and how the overlap between the two is actually much bigger than the extreme end of the range. So, the difference between biological sex for at least brains is not a lot narrower than I think a lot of people think that it's justifying any kind of strict gender roles than we've had previously. So, the last thing I want to say is I think I entirely understand when some people get very concerned about this issue, that it's about the erasure of women and women's spaces, and we must always be mindful and empathetic that everyone deserves a safe space from gender-based abuse and violence, and that's really important.
What do you say when people ask you how we should fund public services?
I agree with the party policy on this, that we need to tax the super rich more in the first instance. So the Green Party policy on taxing 1% of assets over 10 million and 2% over 1 billion, which would bring in up to about £50 billion a year. We also need to make sure that we're taxing activities that damage our climate through a carbon tax. The government seems to be a bit unwilling to commit to borrowing in a prudential manner to invest in public services. And I think together these tax rises and prudential borrowing can raise substantial amounts for investment. But I think the one thing we also need to remember is that investment in public services can itself cause growth and fund public services and further investment. So I think if we've learned anything from the past 15 years, you can't cut your way to growth. Government spending on the right things, I think, acts like a ratchet. So delivering growth, and with it, that brings rising tax revenues, which means we then have more money available for spending, which means more growth, which then means more tax revenues, and on and on. So, being stuck in this endless cycle of managed decline means that we have less money to spend on our public services, which means then economic activity decreases, productivity doesn't rise, and then we get stuck in having to make further cuts. And it makes sense, I think, if you think about it. So a well-funded NHS treats people faster, meaning they're able to do more productive work. A well-funded public transport system means that people are able to depend on it to get to work. So fewer people drive, which means better air quality, which means less demand on the NHS for air quality related health issues. Publicly owned utilities actually invest in their infrastructure, creating jobs, and we get rivers that aren't full of effluent, to put it politely. And these things all act together. So I think it was South Korea after the 2008 crash went through large amounts of investment in its economy, and they were the ones that recovered from the financial crash quickest, whereas we had a lost decade of growth because of austerity.
What do you think the UK's relationship to NATO should be?
the answer to this question has changed quite a lot since the invasion of Ukraine. So the government is committed to raising our spending on defence to 5% by 2030. And I think one thing Brexit has taught us that if we don't stand by our commitments to collective action with other countries, then we damage our standing in the world. And that means we're less able to use our power to influence others. So with an active war in Europe, I think it's really important that we stand by that commitment and take an active role in standing up to Putin's war of aggression. But having said that, we must also understand what has and is funding Putin's war of aggression, that we are having to commit to this 5%, which is decades of buying Russian national gas across Europe. Therefore, alongside it, we must rapidly complete the transition to fossil fuel-free energy generation and heating, and support other countries around the world to do the same. So that's why, raising our spending raising our defence spending on the back of cutting our international aid budget is really short-sighted. If we want to end wars, then we've got to help other countries transition to clean energy as soon as possible, so that we can stop buying fossil fuels from dictators like Putin.
What is your feeling on electoral packs and working with other organisations and candidates?
So I think the door is always open for discussion. So in Worcestershire in May, we stood candidates in every division apart from one, where there was a like-minded independent standing, who is in a group with the Greens at the county council. So I think any agreement, there needs to be a cast iron commitment to dealing with the climate emergency as soon as possible. But if that's something other people can agree to, then the door's always open. Let's talk about it.
How do you think we can better convey the urgency and impact of the climate crisis?
So I think we can use the evidence of people's own eyes. So here in Worcester, this winter we were flooded 5 times. Worcester has always flooded over time, but it used to be a once in a decade or once in a generation flood that would flood to the level we've seen, and now we're getting it happening multiple times per year. We're about to go into our 3rd heat wave of the summer. It wasn't that long ago before we had a summer where it was 40 degrees for a few days, and that's just not normal weather in this country. We see massive wildfires in this country on moorlands. It's on the news there was a big wildfires in California that destroyed loads of people's homes. This is all stuff that's happening every day in front of people's eyes. So we have to make sure that every time it happens, we are standing up and pointing out, going, "This is what climate change looks like. This is what climate breakdown looks like." Just use the evidence in front of people's eyes, because it is happening every day.
How would you, as deputy leader, support getting Greens off the ground in areas with little or no Green Party at the moment?
That's a good question. So we have members up and down the country. Part of it is identifying where there are areas with enough members to form a decent campaign, but there's currently little activity, and then speaking to those members and asking them what they need to get started and providing that support. I think we had some training from the Central Green Party after our last elections about getting support, finding supporters and turning them into activists. And there's so much you can do by emailing people or messaging people, etc. But the most effective thing to do is actually to talk to people and ask them, because most people will think, "Oh, I don't know anything about running a campaign," or "I don't know how to stand for election." So we have to do better at asking people to actually get started. Very often, a lot of people who campaign for the Greens aren't actually members of the party. So a lot of the steps of getting started are finding those people. So as deputy leader, I think my key question to ask any member is, how active is your local Green Party, and then what can you do to help them, what can I do to help them, and then what can I do to help you find your volunteers. Because at least for me, I have experience of running our election strategy here in Worcester, but it wasn't that long ago. other councillors tell me the story that the Green Party in Worcester was three people in a room deciding which one of them was going to stand, and now we've got 230 members in Worcester. We campaign across the whole city, and it takes time to get there, but we just have to find the people who will get started with it.
We don't have a whip system in the Green Party. How do you manage differences between your personal views and Green Party policy?
So I think the key part is talking it through. So as co-leader of the Green Group in Worcester, I can tell you that we don't always agree on everything. Sometimes we talk it through and we come to an agreement. Sometimes we don't, and that's okay. I think that's what grown-up politics looks like. I'd much rather that the ridiculous situations we get with other parties, where politicians are telling journalists they're not happy with a policy and then they vote for it anyway because of the whip. We live in a representative democracy. We're elected to represent our residents, not to be our party's representative in the area. So I think people would have generally a lot more trust in politics if they trusted their representatives to vote in their best interest rather than the parties. We've had situations in Worcester where most of the people in the Green Group are in favour of a piece of play equipment being built, and some are representing an area where where it's going to be built, and some of the residents are expressing concern about antisocial behaviour and that those kind of things. And we disagreed on it at the vote, but I think that's because Green Party councillors are free to stand up for what's best for their own residents, rather than party policy.
How do we make a bigger impact with the media?
So I think this is the only question where I reject the premise of the question. So the national media in this country is not interested in the Green Party. Most of it is owned and controlled by people who won't be affected by climate change first, who want lower taxes for selfish reasons, and know that populist rhetoric brings clicks and sells newspapers. Bad news sells effectively. So even locally, our local papers will often feature culture war stories because it drives engagement, drivers against cyclists, lack of housing versus asylum seekers, etc. So our story, the one of radical hope in the face of climate change, in the face of bad public services that are getting worse, in the face of war in Europe, in the face of genocide in Gaza, is not something that sells. So I don't think playing the game of trying to get the attention of newspapers, whether that's with eco-populism or anything else, is not how we win. We need to ask ourselves a different question, which is, in the face of a media that is complicit in centering despair, how do we get a positive story in front of voters? Because I think that's that positivity that Green Party campaigners bring that brings people on board. We're not the ones who are saying, things can only get a little better, or things are worse now under somebody else. We're the ones who come in to say things can be better, and we're the ones who can do it.
What do you think of the Green Party electoral strategy known as Target to Win?
I think it's great. This is what we've used to success. I've got it right here. Target to Win is crucial. It's been crucial to our success in Worcester. It's not easy to implement. It takes considerable time and energy to deliver properly, but it does work. It's been what has got us to where we are in Worcester. So we took our first seat on the City Council in 2012, and now we've won the popular vote 3 times in a row in the local elections. We have 12 councillors on the City Council, and in the May elections for our county council, when obviously everyone was talking about the rise of reform, we returned more councillors that were Green in Worcester than any other party did. So when I say that, we returned 4 out of 10 who were Green. No other party delivered more than that. And the longer you do it, the more effective it is. So in most of Worcester now, what people say on the doorstep is, you're the only ones who come outside of election time, or even you're the only ones who come ever, which I did have people saying to me on the doorstep this afternoon. Because simply other parties just don't do this hard work. And going back to the previous question on the media, this is where the difference is with the Greens, that we have this strategy. If you can put the people in the plan that it needs, it's effective, it will work, it will deliver more Green councillors.
What is your approach to people who disagree with you?
So generally, it is to listen to them, acknowledge what they've said, and then reflect on it. If it's a resident, sometimes it's just actively listening is enough to leave them with a positive feeling that they've been heard. When we're out canvassing, it's not generally a useful use of time to start a discussion with them, because the goal is always to speak to as many people as possible, pick up as many issues as you can, find as many volunteers as you can. If it's other situations, then it's different. In the council chamber, if I'm disagreeing with another party, I'm going to robustly but politely explain why someone might be wrong. But I think that reflection, when you are disagreeing with somebody, is really important, because you need to have the humility to understand that you could be wrong. I might not have the experience that is leading somebody else to a different conclusion than I think is correct. So, listening and reflecting what they're saying and how they may, and then understanding how they may have come to that view is really important. You may end up still disagreeing in the end, but at least you're dealing with them with empathy and care.
Which Green Party policy would you change?
I used to have an easy answer to this question, which was that the Green Party's policy was against HS2, and I was pro HS2. So whenever I'd be in an interview, my answer would always be, "This is the main thing I disagree with on national party policy." But unfortunately, the Green Party's now changed its policy, so it's pro completing HS2 to Birmingham. So that was the main thing, but that's now been changed. I know locally we've been criticised for having a policy statement that mentions horses as a sustainable form of transport. So maybe I take that out. Although when I've been out delivering leaflets in Worcester, I have seen somebody with a horse and cart, and I always look at that and think to myself, well, there's a sustainable form of transport. But yeah, that's the only thing that I can currently think of.
The Green Party has a reputation for a lack of racial diversity. How do we attract non-white members and voters to the Green Party?
Yeah. So this is really important. I should point out again that, unfortunately, we're two white men talking about bringing in a wider diversity into the Green Party. So we do need to do better. We need to, I think, meet people where they are and ask them to get involved. What are their barriers to getting involved? What are the issues that are important to them, and stand up for those issues? We need to ask people again and again what those barriers are and break them down. I think it's very easy as white men to simply think, yes, I'll stand and have no conception of the barriers that other people face who don't look like us. So I know there are councillors and campaigners in Worcester from other parties, for example, who have been regularly targeted with racial abuse, which is absolutely abhorrent and should be condemned. And you can see why the fear of that would put people off. So, there are barriers that other people face that certainly I don't. And it's a question of how we break those down and how we offer the support. Because in general, campaigning is a really positive thing. I mean, other parties may have a different experience, but whenever I knock on the door and say I'm from the Green Party, most people will smile and light up. So it can be a positive experience, but getting people to take those steps, we need to find out why and resolve those problems.
How can we assure disabled people that the Green Party listens to them? So,
this is the conversation I've had with supporters in Worcester, and I think I'd like to think of society as basically split into two sides. One is the disabled, and the other one is the not yet disabled. So, as most people get older, they may have mobility issues, they may have sight issues, they may become disabled later on in life. So, it's not a question of how do we adapt the world for disabled people. It's really how do we adapt the world to make it better for everybody. If people don't need adaptations at the moment, they might need them in the future. So, in Worcester, one of the ways this has come up is through promotion of active travel. So we've had some funding to introduce a bike sharing scheme, and disabled groups, particularly ones for the blind and visually impaired, raised that bike stations being on the pavement could cause problems for the visually impaired. So we worked together to cite those to minimise the problems. But much like the last question, part of it is also we need to bring disabled voices into the Green Party. In Worcester, we've stood candidates with mobility issues because we think it's really important to have those voices in the room where policy is being made. That required extra support from activists because the candidate couldn't go canvassing. But we did that and supported it because it's the right thing to do, and we need those voices. In general, affordances for the disabled often make things better for the able-bodied. So, it's important to include all these things. But find out what adaptations and what barriers, again, people are having to standing and getting involved and doing the work to resolve those.
How important is social class in politics?
It's really important. We have to recognise that there are a great deal of laws and rights in this country that are set up to keep people within their social class. One of my hobby horses is employment rights. So as the law currently stands, you essentially have no rights until you've been in a job for 2 years. I think the Labour government does want to change that, but I believe that's currently still the situation. But even then, once you've got those rights, if your rights are being infringed, how do you go about enforcing that? You could try and go to an employment tribunal, but that can take years of time for an uncertain result, and you've still got to figure out what you're doing with your job and how you pay your bills in the meantime. And if you don't have any financial cushion behind you, enforcement of your rights is pretty much unobtainable. People should join a union because that is one way that you can help deal with these things. But and if you are working for a small employer that doesn't recognise a union, there's limited benefits you can get from that. But you should definitely have those. You should definitely join a union because they can give you advice and support about what to do in those situations. But it remains very difficult to enforce your rights. And I've had residents contact me at their wits' end because their home is full of mold and damp, and because their landlord hasn't fixed their boiler in 18 months. People are terrified that if they complain, their landlord will give them a no-fault eviction and then they'll be homeless. So we have to recognise that rights aren't enough if only those of higher classes have the ability to enforce them. So equality of opportunity is not just offering everyone the same thing, it's also giving the most support to the people who have the least so they have the same chance of success. A number of times you hear people, well, I didn't get any help. I pulled myself up by my own bootstraps, as if nobody else is grafting or struggling, when they don't recognise their own privilege of coming from a home where their parents are well off and they lived at home and were able to do that. So a lot of people don't have access to that kind of stuff. So understanding that and the effect it has on people is really important.
What other issues are important to you?
So active travel is really important for me. I run a bike bus for my son's primary school every week on a Monday to help encourage children to cycle to school. Worcester could be a really cyclable city. It's pretty flat for the most part. It's pretty compact, but the cycling infrastructure here is dire. So getting people walking and cycling in our city would make a massive difference. It's vastly cheaper to build that infrastructure than the £250 million on a few miles of bypass that some of our local Labour councillors want to do. It means we need carrots and sticks, so make it safer to walk and cycle away from cars, and also make it more difficult to get about by car because it makes the air cleaner. So Worcester is currently in an air quality management area due to the amount of NOx in the city. It makes people healthier and happier. So we need to do more on that. I've been really proud of the work of Bike Worcester, which is our local group that promotes cycling. We hosted the Bike Bus Global Summit in Worcester earlier this year, which was a big success. Brought people from around the world who are interested in bike buses, like Coach Balto from Portland in the US. So this is something that I'm really keen on. I was talking to a fellow councillor about something about this today, because one of the things the Labour government brought in the 97 to 2010 was like this idea of choice and marketisation of both education and health. And so we have, parents have a lot more choice now about which primary school, for example, they send their child to. And I think this is one of the big causes of congestion and the issues of poor air quality around schools, is that naturally everyone wants to send their child to the best school in the area, and that means they then, if they live not within walking distance of their primary school, they end up then driving their child to school. And it goes back to employment rights as well, that if your boss is saying to you, you need to be in by 9 o'clock in the morning, then you need to drive your child to school because you want them to have the best education. You then need to get to school get to your work by 9 a.m. And for a lot of people, they see the car as the only legitimate way of doing that. So that, rather than looking to say we should be making every school the best school, or every school as good as it can be, we end up with too many parents trying to go to the same schools, which then leads to more congestion and brings all the problems of air quality alongside that. So it's a big problem that I think we need to do more to solve.
Why do you think you should be deputy leader, and what will you do if you're elected?
So my preferred style of leader, and this comes from my day job as a chief technology officer for a small company making software, is so we used what's called the Scrum workflow. So the idea is that you have, as part of that, you have a Scrum Master who's termed the servant leader, and their job is to clear everyone else's impediments out. So if somebody's got a problem that is stopping them being able to do their work, then you're the one who clears their problem for them, allows them to succeed. So I think my role, where I see my role as deputy leader, is if I'm elected, then I will work tirelessly to help local parties up and down the country recruit more volunteers and activists, elect more councillors, and deliver more MPs at the general election. And if they've got a problem that needs solving, then come to me and I will help them solve it. I have hopefully demonstrated locally as our election strategy officer, delivering our popular vote win for the third year running, the most county councillors in Worcester, and we were first or second in half the city and improved our vote share in every division we campaigned in. That I know how to deliver electoral success. I think Zach has done a really good job travelling up and down the country, energising activists, and I'm keen to do the same and help local parties turn those supporters into activists into candidates, and candidates into councillors, and just do it all with their, in my launch video, I was talking about this idea of radical hope, that it's very easy to be dispirited in the current world with a Labour government that I think people thought or hoped was going to be better than it is. It didn't expect it to go through the winter fuel allowance or to save with people the way it has. Like I said, it can be easy to be dispirited, but we do have a positive story to tell. We are the party that says it can be better. We don't accept that we can't help everyone who needs it. We're one of the most rich countries in the world. It shouldn't be that we are increasing children in child poverty. And I bring, hopefully, radical hope that we can do better and must do better.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.